Halloween is just around the corner. It would really suck if you didn't pre-order my book, Bake Anime, available now. Link in the description box below. Out November 8th. Go! Pre-order! Like most earnest anime fans, earlier this year I was preparing to watch the new episodes for the Attack on Titan final season by reviewing the first part of season 4 to brush up on the key details of the show, when I noticed something peculiar. Nestled in the hands of that little rat Gabby right at the end of the 4th episode of the season were a few distinct food items. A banh mi sandwich, a Danish pastry, and finally, a slice of pizza. These food items are part of the Liberio festival that Gabby and her friends were at. The Tiber family has set up this festival and invited many foreign dignitaries to come and see what's going on in Old Liberio. But these innocently placed food items, which almost seem to be an afterthought, reveal deeper cracks in the world building of Attack on Titan that has shaken me to my very core. After all, if there's a banh mi sandwich in Liberio, that not only implies that Vietnam exists in the world of Attack on Titan, but so does imperialism, which led to the creation of the sandwich in the first place. If there's a Danish in the world of Attack on Titan, then not only is there a Denmark, but there's also an Austria, because the mix of Austrian and Denmark baking techniques are what led to the creation of the Danish. And if there's pizza in the world of Attack on Titan, then not only is there also in Italy, but that means that there's probably also a Pope, since Italy is where the Pope lives. And if there's a Pope, then that also means that Jesus exists, and then there's sex abuse of the minors? And why stop there? If there's in Italy, there's a Gucci, which means that there's a 2021 biopic called House of Gucci, which implies the existence of Lady Gaga and Adam Driver, which thereby brings into question if the fictional world of Star Wars exists in the fictional world of Attack on Titan. Where do we stop? Excuse me. As you can tell, I'm a little heated about this. After all, when I sit down to watch giant human monsters chomping down on every human being in sight, I don't want to have to think about the colonial occupation of Vietnam. You know what I mean? Which really begs the question. Is there a point to incorporating the realities of European imperialism / intricacies of 20th century geopolitics? Does it add anything to the world building present in Attack on Titan? Or was it just a cheeky storyboard artist at Wit Studio taking a clumsy attempt at being precious with the food items in this Liberio festival, thereby unknowingly threatening to collapse the entire fabric of reality crafted by the show's creators? And what's more frustrating is the fact that, as a world, the Attack on Titan universe is really fascinating and diverse, with politics that interweave perfectly with amazing battle scenes and a Game of Thrones-esque show that many people love. And the world building, up until this point in the show, is really good. And look, I get that I'm probably the only person who cares about food and anime this much, but it just really bugs me that they dropped the ball now with this one scene. So today we're going to take some time to break down Attack on Titan's world building, looking mostly at food, and we're going to ask ourselves how and where it all went wrong. Grab your flingy sorty thingies. What are these called? Do they have a name?
Directional mobility.
Get ready to take down the biggest monster of all. Bad world building. Fear me. Before we get too far into it, let me introduce you to the anime, especially if you've never seen it before. Originally a manga series written and illustrated by Hajime Isayama, the story follows the lives of Eren Yeager, Mikasa Ackerman, and Armin Arlert, 3 kids who grow up in a vague, early 20th century Europe type of country, but one with a twist. They live in the shelter of the outermost of 3 walls that were erected to keep out massive, human-like monsters called Titans who hunt humans for sustenance. These 3 walls and the inhabitants who reside behind them are the last of humanity who are struggling to stay alive in the face of the horrors the Titans create. The anime aired in 2013 and was an instant and massive success, and has been airing on and off with a scheduled final part in 2023. Spoilers for the show ahead, so click away if you don't want to have any plot points ruined. Just make sure to come back and finish this video when you're done. Anyway, after watching his mom get munched by a Titan, Eren and company joined the Survey Corps, a branch of the military that fights against the Titans on the front line. Life is hard. because the people of the city are literally trapped inside a circular wall, which is in place to help protect them from the wandering, human-hungry titans. Supplies in everything are always short. Everyone lives under the pall of wartime scarcity every day of their lives because they are basically constantly in a state of war. But at least when they're in the military, Eren and his friends have a place to sleep and usually something to eat. After fighting some titans, Eren realizes that he can turn into a titan, which causes a true hubbub, and his commanders decide to use his mysterious ability to reclaim Wall Maria, the wall that he used to live behind before it was breached by a titan all those years ago. From there, it gets truly complicated. To make matters as brief as possible, Eren and friends discover one secret after another and come to find that the humans who live behind the three walls are not the last humans left alive, and that they have, in fact, been subjugated by an outside group of people called the Marleyans, who wanted to keep the wall dwellers, called the Eldians, behind their walls because all the Eldians have the ability to be turned into titans with the right cocktail of drugs. And the Marleyans don't want this to happen. Basically. Obviously, when Eren and friends figure this out, they become quite upset, and Eren especially goes out to seek revenge. Thus, they infiltrate this foreign land called Marley, and it is there that we meet a group of Eldian children who are titans in training who want to become titans to serve and protect Marley. The story is complicated, and rightfully so. Each season of the show draws back the curtains on a new layer of this fictional society and later world that the Titans live in. Season 1 introduces us to the Titan problem. Season 2 introduces us to the political intrigue that spawns all kinds of lies told to the inhabitants of the walls. Season 3 introduces us to the idea that there are more humans alive than previously expected, and Season 4 uncovers the consequences of that in great detail. Each season builds on the previous material with great skill while still managing to keep the viewers entertained with awesome action sequences and scintillating drama. It all culminates in an ending that is truly impressive, manga readers will know. Not only is the world building great politics and action-wise, but overall the creative minds behind the show go a long way toward convincing us that the world of Attack on Titan sits squarely in the Western Hemisphere. The names of many of the main characters are distinctly European-sounding: Eren Yeager, Armin Arlert, Sasha Blouse, Hanj Zoe, Levi Ackerman. There's even a guy named Gunther, for goodness sake. And Mikasa, the one character who's canonically half Asian, has her father's last name, Ackerman. So we know that these names weren't randomly selected, and there was some thought put behind the sound of the names. The architecture of all the buildings we see in Attack on Titan is European as well. The rounded walls that serve as defensive protection shelter each layer of livable space for the humans residing inside the walls. The circular style of walling seen in the show is very similar to that of several walled-in German towns. And I'm sorry if I say these wrong, but I think they're pronounced Nordlingen, Rothenburg ob der Tauber, and Dinkelsbühl. Again, sorry if that is not right. Inside the cities, homes are built in the half-timbering style, which is an architectural style that began and evolved in Germanic Saxony. Public buildings in the cities are built in a Romanesque style, a style characteristic of medieval Europe, examples of which can be found all over the continent, making it one of the first architecture designs since Imperial Roman designs that swept the continent in popularity. And that's not to mention the clothing, the small daily appliances and tools, and other little tell-alls that help to clue the reader into the cognitive illusion of Europe that is so carefully crafted by the creators. They really go the distance to help us live the fantasy, as it were, so to see them drop the ball on their world building with some food, especially so late in the game in Season 4, really hurts. But before we look too closely at their unholy transgressions, let's start by looking at the food-oriented world building of Attack on Titan pre-Season 4 to get a good baseline for their food world building up until this point. Ever since I watched L from Death Note eat a banana like a psychopath, my favorite thing to do is look for funny food quirks in anime, and there are a few patterns of food consumption behavior worth noting in Attack on Titan. When the members of the Survey Corps are given meat, usually as a celebration for a job well done, it is eaten with, well, I guess you can say that they certainly eat the foods with gusto. In a truly hilarious moment, Sasha does something similar with a potato early on in the series, and it's how we're introduced to her character. She is a girl who joined up with the military to be able to eat, even though she's kind of a scaredy cat. I mean, I too would do some crazy things for food, so I can't blame her for being desperate to eat. It's honestly very relatable, and it kind of makes me want a potato, if I'm being honest. Actually, I wonder if I can recreate her potato and see if it's all that great. Granted, it kind of seems like it's raw. I was debating this with my friend Joe. We were wondering if it's raw or if it's cooked, but due to the fact that when she chews it, it crumbles off on her face, and when she tears it in half between her hands, I don't think it can be raw. So the closest thing would be a baked or steamed potato. So we're gonna try to make a potato as good as the one that Sasha's eating. On my quest to make the most incredible potato possible, one that was exactly like Sasha's, I pored over tome after tome in my local library, looking for the perfect recipe. Do I bake it? Do I steam it? Do I prick it? Do I anoint it with oil, herbs, spices, seasonings? In the end, after much research, I came up with the single best way to cook this potato. Roast it at high heat for 20 minutes. Of course, every good recipe needs a great taste tester, and since it's summer and all my friends have left Japan for vacation, I'm going to take this potato to my friends in England to see what they have to say. Journeying with this stupendous spud was unlike any other journey I have ever endured in my lifetime. I went up escalators. I went through airports. This potato went through security. It had to endure the stares of all the passengers looking at it. Is it a potato or is it a bomb? We will never know. Well, we know, but they didn't. By the time I got to the UK, I was so excited to share this potato with my friends. Dear viewer, I am writing to you from beyond the grave. Once I arrived in the UK, I contracted COVID, a deadly disease going around town. This spud had to be sacrificed for the greater good. After all, what better chance could it hope for in life than to serve its only master? I put it in a soup and ate it, and it was really good. Rip potato. Okay, so yeah, even as a soup, the humble potato isn't really that awe-inspiring, but it was incredibly satisfying, and I think it helps us to understand Sasha even better. She went crazy for a simple, boring, basic potato, and this ties into a major theme of the anime. When your life is at risk and the basics of life, like food, shelter, and safety, are low on supply, how quickly does it take for you to lose your humanity? Sasha's wild and overzealous eating is funny, but it's also kind of sad when you put it in perspective and realize there's a point the creators are making with the scarcity of available food and her willingness to risk her life just to be able to eat. The people living here are basically in an open-air prison, and when you live under such desperate conditions, it makes people do desperate things. On the other hand, when you see meat presented to political leaders or those with power, it is usually eaten in a refined and elegant manner. In animating the characters to eat in these ways, the show reinforces right off the bat that food has a great socioeconomic significance in this world. For the poorer frontline soldiers, the cannon fodder, something as simple as a piece of meat can cause hysterics and is therefore conveyed to be a rare, special food for these people. In contrast, the higher-ranking officials eat a much more refined version of the same food with layers of cutlery and napkins to protect their clothing from any stray meat juices lingering about. In this way, the anime makes it clear to the average viewer that there is a great economic divide in the world of the wall-dwelling Eldians, which is heightened by the scarcity of available food. And honestly, if you realize what foods the Eldians have available to them, you might also go a bit food crazy like Sasha, because in the rest of the show, basically the only foods we see, especially in the first few seasons, are bread, potatoes, stew, and meat. Occasionally, there will be some tea, maybe coffee and wine. The last two are reserved, once again, for those higher-ups, people with more means in the group of Eldians. The average everyday person, though, gets basic foods. Bread is quite significant as a staple food in many cultures' diets all around our actual world. It can be made with as little as flour, salt, and water for a really plain flatbread, or a leavening agent, and fat can be used to add more body to the typical bread loaf. In fact, you can make your own leavening agent just by leaving a little flour and water out to ferment a little. It's pretty simple, and if you were in your sourdough making phase in 2020, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. This is a technique that they probably use in the world of Attack on Titan, so let's take a look at how it's done. Making your own bread is pretty easy. All you do is take a little bit of flour and water, mix it together, leave it out to rot on the counter for a couple of weeks, come back, try to salvage what you can, mix it with a little bit more flour and water, and let it get nice and bloated like your uncle after Thanksgiving dinner. Once it's gassy enough, you need to slap it around as if it's a fish flapping on the ground. Good morning, little Spather. No, don't run away from me, Spather. Hello. Hello, little Spather. And then you're going to go ahead and cut it open like a scalpel-happy med student in their first year of medical practice. Once your bread is ready to go, you just bake it and hope for the best.
Who's that Survey Corps member?
Ugh, sorry, that joke didn't rise to the occasion. Sorry if I burned any bridges. By the way, if you're impressed with any of my baking skills, once again, make sure to pre-order my anime cookbook called Bake Anime, out on November 8th. It is available for pre-order. Once again, that link is in the bio. I am including this because my editorial team, my publishing team is making me do this, but it's gonna make a great Christmas gift, I promise. Similar to bread, potatoes are a staple food that are actually quite nutritional. While they also have a history, potatoes are native to South America, and their presence in European cuisine is also a result of colonialism. They've been so ubiquitously adopted into many cultures' foods that they are no longer regarded by many cultures as being a foreign food. They aren't the best food in the world for you, so don't go stuffing your face with them hoping that you're going to lose oodles of weight, but they are relatively low calorie, and they include some important vitamins and minerals, and they're pretty high in fiber. Meat, though rare, is given out to the average LDN every once in a while, but when you see it, it's usually a pretty basic roast or a hunk of anime-shaped meat. You know, the meat that doesn't look like it came off of any animal that you know of, but it looks good anyway. As a side note, while doing research for this essay, I was scrolling through the episodes looking for food, and on this episode, I really scrubbed the timeline too fast and thought for just a second that this was a very big piece of meat, and let's just say that I'm never going to look at a Titan the same way again. Stew is one of the only dishes you see in Attack on Titan, and in that it's like the only cooked meal that anyone seems to eat, but it kind of makes sense because stew is a really versatile dish. You can make a simple stew with just potatoes, other vegetables, some water, some basic seasonings, and you can always add in whatever you have on hand to flesh it out if you'd like a little bit more oomph. In a show that's all about world building, these pretty basic foods are really great choices, honestly. They're neutral enough to not attract undue attention, while still helping to create the idea that this society is pretty poor. They have to rely on very simple foods for sustenance, and there isn't always enough to go around. What's also key to notice is that for a story developed by a Japanese person, Isayama went out of his way to try to build up a distinctly Western-seeming society with staple foods that are relevant to European countries. In contrast, Japanese staples include rice, miso, and fish, and you really don't see much of that at all in Attack on Titan, and when you do, it's usually prepared in a distinctly European way. As a historical aside, these are also great food choices as far as wartime goes, which the Eldians are very much in. During wartime, the staple foods of any given culture usually become what the average person depends upon. In Japan during World War II, it was rice that was eaten above all else, and when you ran out of rice, you really knew that you were in trouble. In Europe, during the same time, if you couldn't get your hands on some bread at least, you also knew you were going to be in trouble. In terms of rationing, the amount of food that we see in the show is consistent with actual wartime rationing during World War II as well. In Europe, meat, coffee, and alcohol, among other things, were strictly reduced to make sure that there was enough to go around, while things like wheat and vegetables were easier to come by. And the show itself directly acknowledges these rations. In a break in the episode, we see at one point that the creators include an informational card explaining the scarcity of meat. In the season 3 opening, we see an abandoned coffee grinder rusting away to nothingness as a clear symbol of abandoned luxuries. And in one episode, one of the first hints of outsiders comes in their abandoned coffee cups. At this point in the episode, Aaron and the gang are aware that a mysterious group of human enemies are nearby. When scouting out to look for them, they find a hastily abandoned camp where Army notices a dark liquid, but he doesn't even have a name to call it by because that's how rare the drink is. So, in depicting the world of the Eldians behind the wall, the food does a great job at first of setting us up for some clear expectations for the people who live here and what their lives are like, both in a way that helps us to vaguely give some clues about where they live, as well as how scarce and therefore important food is to the people in this world. As with many great stories, the bigger the tale, the more complex the world building usually is, and usually needs to be in order to help make the political intrigues and personal dramas meaningful. Excellent examples are, of course, the Lord of the Rings books, Game of Thrones, the Kingkiller Chronicle, and so many more. Stories that are rich in details about things like architecture, culture, economics, religions, and of course, food, to name a few things, help the reader to fit themselves into the world and really let themselves experience it from many distinct angles. But as necessary as world building is, it can quickly go awry with what some people call lazy world building. Lazy world building happens when writers take some easy ways out with their fantasy worlds. They leave things to be as generically fantasy as possible. You know, the same old cobbled streets, a castle, a princess in need of help, that kind of thing. A lot of isekai anime, for example, fall into this trope. Or copying existing cultures for no good reason, like making your bad guys kind of generically Nazi-like. Or perhaps your timeline is off. America has only existed for 250 years and has gone through a great number of political upheavals. And you mean to tell me that some royal family has been ruling the same country for the past 10,000 years? Zelda games, I am looking at you. Even Japan, who is said to have the oldest continuous hereditary monarchy in the world, can only trace their descendants back for 1,400 plus years and claim 2,600 plus years of rule. In a sense, the world building in Attack on Titan is already a little bit lazy. It's pretty well known that the map of the world of Attack on Titan is basically a mirrored version of the map of the actual world, with Paradise being Madagascar and Marley being a country in the continent of Africa. That already opens up some pretty wild theories, such as Attack on Titan being a prequel for the movie Madagascar, which is absolutely hilarious. And this is like originated on Reddit, and it stipulates that the lemurs from the movie are descended from the pure beast Titan, and that therefore King Julian is Eren. The original poster has a lot of evidence to support this theory, so I'll leave a link in the description below. Make sure to go check that out for a good time. So to build on the food world building in Attack on Titan, it's kind of already a little bit suspicious. We see some food items, and the most clever thing that anyone can do is put them in a stew. I mean, it's not great, but it does make sense given the context of what is happening in the world. And when you see the characters break out of their walls and find human life elsewhere, the food does get more nuanced. My favorite example of this is with Niccolo, the former Marleyan soldier who works as a chef for the Eldians after being taken captive. He lives on the coast and is an excellent cook. So excellent, in fact, that Sasha, remember our food-loving friend? She falls in love with him when she beholds his feast. He has prepared many seafood dishes, notable amongst which is fresh lobster, which Sasha immediately gobbles up. The food is pretty extravagant looking, but obtainably so for a talented cook who is living on the ocean and has access to seafood. Unfortunately, especially into season 4 when there are higher expectations than ever for some big questions to be answered and for some serious twists to be revealed, we see the creators lose out on some of those smaller world-building details to focus on driving the story forward. The food in Attack on Titan, which had previously been pretty nondescript wartime food, was abruptly pushed into the limelight with one such twist in season 4, and not in a good way. To set the scene, let me fill you in on the political intrigue. At this point in the season, Aaron and company have more or less made their way into Marley and are aware that there is a whole country that has been subjugating the Eldians on Paradise Island by making more Titans and throwing them over a wall onto the island to go and run free. The people who really run Marley politically are the Tiber family, who are actually Eldian but live as honorary Marleyans. As with most examples of real-world history, this family once again proves that the rich and powerful in society are almost never subject to the same rules of regular people. They were one of the first and some of the only Eldian families to turn against their own people to help free Marley from Eldian rule, and as such, they are well regarded in Marley. Willie Tiber, which, by the way, is a very stupid name to give a very important man. Sorry to anyone who literally goes by the name Willie, but honestly, grow up. The head of the family is what he is. He invites a bunch of foreign dignitaries into the internment zone in Marley, Liberio, to see what's going on. A lot of people set up stalls and shops to celebrate the festivities, and this is where we see the problem foods, the banh mi, the Danish, and the pizza. In a jovial celebration, a few young kids eat these items as a treat, smiling the whole time. And it's a moment of great empathy where you see Sasha and these kids enjoying some food that they never get to eat. It would be nice, except that the more they ate, the bigger my frown of discontent became, because while these kids were chowing down on some foreign delicacies, I couldn't help but think about the French occupation of Vietnam and the fact that logically in this world, Hitler did, will, or has existed. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me explain a little further. It sounds silly, but that is what is actually implied here, and it's an unintentional consequence of bad world building. By choosing to sell these items as foreign foods at this festival, no doubt to cater to the dignitaries who were showing up, the creators of the show have made the very real decision to include real-world food, but this real-world food has history behind it, and that leaves a lot of implications running loose along with all those other Titans. Let's really break down each food to its roots so that you can see exactly what I mean. Let's start with Danishes. Though Danish pastry can take on many forms, probably one of the most recognizable Danish pastries is a square of puff pastry with cheese and jam smeared across the top and then baked together. The humble Danish pastry was invented when Danish bakery workers went on strike in 1850. The owners of the bakery brought in new workers, some of whom were Austrian, to fill in the vacant positions, and those Austrians introduced some of their own country's specialty bakery items, which quickly became popular. After the strike ended, the Danish workers adopted a few of those recipes, modifying them slightly to their own tastes, and thus the Danish pastry, called Wienerbrød or Vienna bread in Denmark, was born. It wasn't until Mr. L.C. Klitting brought the Danish to America that cheese and jams were added to the top, so technically speaking, the version of the Danish that we see in the anime is very American-specific, which not only implies the existence of Austria, it also implies the existence of America, and therefore gun-hungry idiots who love shooting anything that moves. And if that's the case, I find myself wondering where the Americans are, because if there are truly Titans running amok, it's open hunting season, baby, and I know that there are some people with guns who are going to want a piece of that action. So I'm sitting here editing the video, and I'm getting really hungry, and I really want a Danish, so let's go. Next up is the humble banh mi, a delightfully Vietnamese sandwich made of baguettes, pate, cilantro, pork, pickled carrot and onion, some kind of chili or chili sauce. And you may be wondering, how did the Vietnamese people come across a baguette and pate, both distinctly French foods? Well, through colonial occupation, of course. As these two cultures came together in the 1860s, the Vietnamese adopted a few famous French food items and made a completely new dish. To go into a little bit more depth in this, banh is a Vietnamese pronunciation of the French pain, or pain, or bread, basically. It was brought over and was eaten exclusively by French imperialists. Wheat doesn't commonly grow in Vietnam, or it didn't back then, so these ingredients were expensive and they were foreign and forbidden to the Vietnamese people. There was this mindset that the fish and rice diet of the Vietnamese is what made them weak and vulnerable to colonization, and the European diet of meat and wheat made them stronger and ordained to conquer the Vietnamese. Funnily enough, this is a very similar mindset that occurred in Japan after World War II when America occupied Japan, but that is a different video for a different day. Any French seen to be eating the local Vietnamese food were looked down on, but of course, one thing led to another, and this sandwich was born. Funnily enough, after World War II, the wheat importers in Indochina, the French colony, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, were owned by Germans who lost the war and were seized by the French, leading to a massive influx of wheat and sweetened condensed milk into the market, which were the forerunners of the beverage we know today as Vietnamese coffee. Also after the war, the 100,000 Vietnamese troops that helped France fight stayed in France, learned to cook, and this includes Ho Chi Minh himself, who worked as a pastry chef on a French battleship. They brought back the realities of how well the French prepared their food, as well as the fact that the French were keeping these luxuries to themselves. And this information ultimately helped to spread discontent, which led to the Vietnamese independence movement. So, not only does America exist in this world, but so do Vietnam and France, and Marley isn't the only country who's doing some oppressing, if you know what I'm saying. And look at pizza. I don't even think I need to get into it because I'm sure you get the point, but look, pizza is from Italy. Tomatoes didn't exist in Italy until the 16th century. Again, thanks colonialism. They weren't widely consumed because everyone thought that red stuff was poisonous, so until the 18th century, no one really ate them. And then these things that are on the pizza, pepperoni, tomatoes, we don't know. But if it's pepperoni, again, pepperoni is a pizza ingredient that made its way onto pizza in America first before going back to Italy. So they weren't even officially called pepperoni until after World War II, and at this point, I'm just saying, you could basically date exactly when Attack on Titan is happening relative to our own world, just based on the food that they brought in and what exactly is on that pizza. And this is it. This is the problem. Instead of including some foreign foods that are just nondescript enough to be passable, the creators chose food with a history, food with a body count behind it, and fighting, and war, murder, death. These foods could be used to tell a richer story and help to craft a more cohesive history for some world building, but instead, these foods seem to be haphazardly chosen. And as much as I love these foods, you can't ignore the history. So when you include these very pronounced delicacies into a world that has been sold to us as a fantasy world, we have problems because worlds start to collide and everything goes a little bit sideways. So why were these foods selected if they're going to do that much damage? I don't have an answer to this question because I doubt I'm ever going to meet the creative minds behind the anime and manga, but I can speculate. Based on my 3 years living in Japan and getting used to the food culture here, I think that from a Japanese perspective, these foods are incredibly recognizable as being foreign. Unlike in America, where we are surrounded by culturally unique food at all time that we greatly Americanize and put our own spin on, and thereby make said food into its own unique thing, orange chicken, for example. In Japan, often there is great emphasis put on making and consuming a dish from another culture in a way that is as good as it possibly can be. Where in America, we sometimes water down cultural offerings to make them more palatable, Japan usually tries to replicate a cultural food perfectly and are sometimes so good at it, you might not find better in the original country. For example, you can get some pizza in Japan that is indistinguishable from pizza that I've had in Italy. And there are many reasons that I love living in Japan, but this is a huge one. I mean, hell, Japan even beat out the Scots at whiskey making. Like, come on. So from a Japanese creative perspective, it may be that choosing these foods was just a simple, easy way to convey the feeling of foreign without having to do the hard work of inventing their own foods to fulfill that idea in the show. As such, the world building veers into being a little lazy, and that's where the creators really miss out. Imagine building this incredible world up to a point where including banh mi meant something important. Or better yet, imagine if they worked within their own fictional universe to create a hybridized food from different sections of the realm. That would be great. But instead what they've done is build their world in such a way that it can be toppled by one wayward Danish pastry. I know what you're thinking. Come on, Emily, lighten up, will ya? No, I will not. I just care a lot, and this is a really deeply beloved show, and that's why I just can't help but pick at it a little bit. I mean, anything worth watching is worth critiquing. And anytime when I'm ruthlessly pushed out of my happy fantasy world of murder and death to face real murder and death, I just... like, you don't want that. You know what I mean? And also, it's really not that hard to include world building with food that works perfectly fine. There are a lot of really good examples, anime or otherwise. Take Full Metal Alchemist, for example, as similar to Attack on Titan in a few ways. It's based on a generally European culture. When the food pops up, it fits in with this vibe without being too specific. For example, some famous FMA foods include things like beef stew, summarily vague and known across many cultures. There's apple pie, a dessert that once again has many variations in several countries in Western culture, and which isn't super specific to any one place. Rather than include foreign food, they stay consistent in their choices. It is also a pseudo-European world, but it doesn't break its own rules by introducing dishes specific to any actual culture or history, especially dishes with complex culinary roots that involve multiple non-show related countries and imperialist pasts that, as far as we know, never occurred in the show's fiction. There is one example of some canonically non-specific Asian characters eating rice bowls, but nothing that's so identifiable and that draws the viewer's attention away from their own world building.
Hey! I forgot! Grandma wanted me to tell you she's making stew tonight! Fuck yeah! Right.
And I know it's not technically an anime, unless you're Moon Knight.
Avatar. You mean that? I mean anime, Steve.
But Avatar: The Last Airbender, a show notorious for passing through many unique places with distinct cultures, goes above and beyond to add variety in their food as well as local delicacies where appropriate. One example is the unfried dough in the Chin Village, a dessert or dish created in commemoration of the time that they almost boiled the Avatar in hot oil. It's a funny highlight from one episode that's vague in and of itself. Fried dough is present in many cultures, but it adds a nice twist. There's a reason that the dough is unfried, and it makes sense with what is going on in the story. The food choices never break the creator's own fiction of the world that they're creating. So yeah, maybe I'm being a little harsh, but when it's clear that good world building can happen around food in a way that adds to the story, or at the very least doesn't take away from it, I get mad when they get sloppy because it could be so much better. It could make so much more sense. Like, come on, that's what they paid them for, right? To make good anime, right? Right? In the end, this one random creative choice has so much more to do with actual history and the convergence of worlds, often through imperialism, exploitation, racism, wars, cultural erasure, and genocide. And when it's handled properly in fantasy or science fiction, we can convey those stories in a thoughtful and informative way. But when it's tossed off as a visual joke, much of what could have been rich embroidery on a fictional tapestry is ripped to shreds, and instead our heads spin with lost opportunity and incongruous incorporation of food porn. But hey, things could be worse. All these implications could be true, which would mean that we do live in the same world as Titans, and, well, I am not ready for that. In any case, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave a comment below letting me know what other food choices in anime rile you up, either for the better or for the worse. Don't forget to pre-order my book, once again, link in the description box below. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys later. Bye! It would really. I can't do it without the accent.
Slighter accent, maybe.
Oh.
First of all, link in the description.
Link in the description. Down the corner.
That's my bad. Start again.
Ooh.
Perfect, but you didn't mention the name. You just said my book.
Oh, yeah.
You gotta say
well,
it.
It's right there. It's written on the cover.
Say
Okay,
it.
all right.